Welcome back. I'm very delighted to have Rehan Huda today, an economist, a former senior economist for finance department, and he's here to shed some lights. Welcome again, Rehan.
Good to be here, thank you.
Now, we spoke earlier about the finances, the crisis in general. We didn't want to go into details because this show, Faith of Life, we actually talk about matters of faith and matters of life. And Islam does not separate between faith and life, because your life will define, of course, how faithful you are, and your faith will help you with your life. This is actually a statement by many scholars. Now, by the same token, many scholars today, including recently in a communique by the Vatican, which is the highest authority in the Catholic Church, they are telling experts and economists to take a look at the model of Islamic financing or finances in Islam. Right. And of course, you heard that, and it's good to hear. And myself and yourself, we attended many conferences in the past. Until today, we hear people talking about considering looking at the model. What is in the Islamic financing model that is not in the traditional, system?
That's an excellent question, and you're right. And we've attended conferences together, and we've spoken on these topics. And to me, it seems like that there's sort of this moral filter which Islam brings to the financial system, to the economic system, to our basic lives, social lives, etc., that seems to be missing. I remember reading a quote by a professor from Columbia University who was saying that Islamic finance can bring a sort of ethics to the financial system, which will be beneficial for people of all faith because of those values and principles it has. And so I think we can certainly bring that moral filter. On the technical side, some of the prohibitions, for example, of explicit interest, riba, the prohibition of gharar, of sort of deceptions and clarity and contractual arrangements, I think that can certainly benefit this current economic system. Because if you look at the cause of the crisis, you had a lot of deception. You had, contracts that people didn't understand.
Fine prints.
Fine prints, exactly, in that where, Islam stresses, clear contracts, a full understanding of the risks between the parties, and that non-exploitative type of financing and that. So I think what you had in the system was exploitative financing, contracts that weren't clear, and basically and the greed and the inherent greed that was generated in the system, you had a collapse of the financial system.
But Rehan, you're an economist. You're dealing with reality, you have facts and statistics. Why would the West in general be interested in Islamic financing? Are there models of success? Are there numbers during this crisis? How did the Islamic financing do? So these are the things that, sometimes we talk, but unless it's realistic, unless it's practical, it will not set any pattern for anybody.
That's a very good point. I remember reading an article in one of the U.S. papers where the Treasury Department there had actually sent their representatives to the Middle East to study Islamic banks, because generally the Islamic banks were unaffected by this crisis. Of course, all the banks were affected in some ways, but not to the extent that the conventional banks were. Now, why is that? One is because of the type of contracts we engaged in. We would not have engaged in subprime. We would not have engaged in some of the derivative and option tradings and that. And one of the lawyers for a bank in the U.S., Devon Bank, which is interesting, it's a Jewish-owned bank, and it is a bank which offers Sharia-compliant financial services. And the lawyer was saying that we were untouched by the subprime crisis because the Islamic law prohibited us from being involved in these type of contracts and that. So certainly there's something to be learned by the structures that Islamic financial institutions have within themselves.
Well, these principles are also in the Torah, in the Old Testament, in the Torah and the Injil Gospel. I know of Christian organizations such as Habitat for Humanity, with whom I have the honor to volunteer. They don't believe in interest, and they build homes interest-free. Now, this takes us to the issue of mortgage, because there are some models there that they say they are Islamic, somehow mortgage, but in reality, I'm not convinced that much. How is this Islamic mortgage working? If we put it this way.
There's different types of models. One model is a very simple lease-to-own type model, an Ijara type model they have in University Bank out of Michigan. You have some models where you have musharaka, there's a partnership where the financier is a part owner of the home with you. Then you have these murabaha type models. They're basically sales installments where the financial institutions buys the house and sells it to you with a markup over time, and that. So there's a price there. There's a cost for the financing. If you have a house that's $300,000, by the time you pay it off, it'll be $400 or whatever $1,000.
But some people, Rehan, are not convinced with the Musharaka model because the rental market depends on the interest. How do you reconcile that?
It's interesting that some of the financial instruments that are Sharia compliant sometimes are benchmarked to LIBOR, benchmarked to the, U.S. Treasury rates, etc. And people say, how can you be benchmarked to interest? How can you be benchmarked to something which is prohibited in Islamic law? And so some of the scholars have said, since we haven't established another benchmark yet, we haven't established some sort of alternative, that you can use these sort of as benchmarks for your pricing. For example, one scholar gives this example that, let's say you have a distributorship to sell pop to a country, and your evil brother has taken the distributorship to sell beer, right? And you're looking at what's a good benchmark, how much profit should I make? And this guy has X percentages, his markup, and that's the only comparable that you have in the market, and you use that as a benchmark for your profits. Although you're selling something which is halal, you're marketing it up, etc. But so right now you're always going to have some sort of cost for the financing. And right now, since there's no other alternative, people do use that as a benchmark rate.
You alluded earlier to some of the principles of Islam. We don't allow hidden clauses, fine prints, nobody read them, as you said. But also, there are other things that are not allowed in Islam, apart from usury. Of course, products that are not useful for one's health, one's mind, one's religion. They are actually harmful. So Islamic investment, very peculiar about this issue. So how do you explain this, especially because you deal with finances, market, some advice to our viewers, what to avoid, we're not promoting any company here, but in principle.
In principle, you can look at sort of Islamic investments, or those that are acceptable within the Sharia, as sort of within the socially responsible investment world, with a few differences. In terms of what's prohibited in Islamic finance for our investment products, such as pornography, alcohol, or products which we don't pertain in. We also have prohibitions related to the financial structure of the companies. If the company has too much debt, those are prohibited. Some of the scholars have come up with a 1/3 debt-equity ratio, so the debt versus the equity of the company and that. So I think the key thing to look for are those ethical companies, socially responsible, that are good for the environment, that have good corporate governance, that produce commodities which are useful to society. So that's what we're sort of Islamic finance is going towards.
And just a couple of weeks ago, we know that Dow Jones has Islamic index, and here in Canada, a couple of weeks ago, TSX announced another Islamic index.
Standard & Poor's index,
and that has a portfolio of how many companies?
I think about 60 companies or so now.
Yeah, but in the U.S. it's over 2,500 companies.
Exactly. I think these are sort of the 60 largest companies. There's probably more within the TSX. So definitely you're seeing more and more of these type of indices that are going to appear in Western jurisdictions. And certainly the investors, not only the Muslim investors, but also socially responsible investors. There's a fund out in the United States called the Imam Fund, and I think 30%, some say as high as 50% of their subscribers are not Muslims.
That's true. Now, Rehan, just to wrap up, are you optimistic about this world crisis?
I think certainly things will change, and I don't think it'll get any worse than it has now, or maybe slightly worse, but there seems to be signs of recovery. But the more important thing, I think, are the lessons that we'll learn for the future. Because unfortunately we seem to have every few years, a crisis here, some sort of crisis, and the root causes seem to be the same. And so I think that sort of moral filter, which Islamic finance may provide now and in the future, as this industry starts to grow, I think hopefully we'll make it a better and safer world financially.
With that positive note, we wrap up today's show. And dear viewers, we heard Brother Rehan shedding light on important topics. In my view, it's very important to understand what's going on in the world. And even crises, they're not bad for us. As economists say, regulation was needed and prices were inflated. So somehow these things will bring people down to prioritize. And as regular individuals live in our life, we start prioritizing and spending our money in what is useful for ourselves and our families, and what is beneficial for our communities, and understand that there are priorities in life, and that life is beautiful if we want to think so, and that we will get the help of Allah, God, if we organize ourselves and follow His teachings, because His teachings will always lead us to success. Again, thank you, Rehan, for being with us today. And until next time, dear viewers, wish you all the best. For any comments or suggestions, do not hesitate to email us at info@faithoflife.net. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.